of the old OGs of U.S. aid. And then all of a sudden, in April of 1968, he's like, you know what, I'm gonna come out of U.S. aid and I'm gonna go back to LAPD now, and they put him on the case, and don't know what went on there, but it just shows you how they can corrupt even the police and the district attorney's office and everyone. It's just it's really, it really goes to show you. But the deep state control over America since JFK and before JFK, as we know, because Nixon came after JFK, but Nixon was Eisenhower's vice president before JFK, and Nixon obviously here as vice president, um,
They're
clearly
like
not the boss
literally
of
wearing mob hats. Like,
those are Panama hats, and they're basically mob hats, and it's this signal, and he's showing, who takes a picture like this holding the vice president's hat by the brim after he just gave it to him. It's just like, we own you, buddy, and you're part of the syndicate and the mob. And you know talked about Operation 40 and the whole history of the CIA. This Barry Seal, with of course with Pablo Escobar, bringing back in tons of Colombian cocaine that was smuggled into the U.S. um, Again, we talk about how the motorcade route was changed and set up to go right past where they knew they had their patsy set up. So they had control of the motorcade route to a certain extent and then changed it. And the guy that would have had control of that were the politicians who were head of the Dallas, which is Earl Cabell. And his brother Charles was the U.S. Air Force officer who basically planned the Bay of Pigs invasion. So the whole Bay of Pigs connection there again, which, you know, super connected to all this. D. Harold Bird, of course, owns the Texas School Book Depository building where Oswald gets the job after living with Ruth Payne, who gives them the free apartment and takes them in and befriends them, and she hooks him up with this job opportunity, and Lee starts working at the Texas School Book Depository building, and some kind of things that are going on with Lee make us believe that he was also being set up to do all this based on intelligence purposes. One of the guys from Lee's old Civil Air Patrol buddy, which the Civil Air Patrol was set up by D. Harold Bird. D. Harold Bird sets up the Civil Air Patrol, which recruits these CIA officers into it. You got Lee Harvey Oswald in the same photo as David Ferry, which links him to the CIA before the assassination. And also Roscoe White, his old buddy from the Marines in Atsugi, winds up joining the Dallas police force in 1968. I mean, 1963, November, like 4th or something, like right before the assassination, he becomes a police officer of Dallas. We talk about the mob connection with Robert Mayhew and Sam Giancana, how, JFK's brother, Robert F. Kennedy, was going after the mob, and he had subpoenaed Sam Giancana and was, basically taunting Sam Giancana, saying, I didn't know that. Oh, I thought only little girls giggled, Mr. Giancana. And he just laughs, like he doesn't even say anything back to him, and it's very, very ominous, because like everyone says that
it's like the "I'ma kill you" moment sort of thing.
this is the moment that Sam Giancana decided that he was going to murder RFK and his brother. Very, very creepy stuff, because Sam Giancana, of course, and Johnny Rosselli are the guys that Robert Mayhew approached when he was asked by the CIA through William Harvey to go into, find a way to assassinate Fidel Castro, because their efforts had failed, and they wanted mob help. And so the Operation 40 was formed. It eventually expanded from the 40 original members into over 120 members that were part of this group that were all trying to kill Castro. And these were a lot of the guys that were left over from the army of, I think, like 400 or 500 guys that stormed at the Bay of Pigs. A lot of them didn't return. And the ones that did went and formed this group that vowed that they were going to, you know, these are the guys that would assassinate presidents routinely around the world, and they were connected to a lot of guys that did that. Of course, there was another plot that was uncovered in Chicago that was supposed to happen 3 weeks before the Dallas assassination in early November, and that was uncovered in late October by the landlady who, you know, thoughtfully called the police to report suspicious activity, and they went and found 4 rifles in a room, and they arrested this one guy who is very, very similar background to Lee Harvey Oswald, if you look at it. So it's really creepy stuff when you look at how the CIA was operating and picking their patsies. Is they would just, you know, they had a certain profile that they wanted to use, and I don't know if this guy was as good of an, you know, he didn't have the Russian wife like Oswald, you know, a Russian wife who was the niece
The
of the
perfect excuse.
Russian Ministry of Affairs, right? I don't know I don't know too much about Arthur Villay. In fact, they covered this up and tried to hide this, and they framed Abraham Bolden, the first black U.S. Secret Service agent, for a crime he didn't commit, and sent him away to jail, and he had to fight like for appeals and to get his name back for a whole bunch of that stuff for years, and yeah, it's nuts. When we also talked about, you know, the Bush connection, because Bush's first company, you know, after he got out of Yale and his senior year at Yale, was a Skull and Bonesman, a sworn Skull and Bones member. The first job that he got was Zapata offshore in Houston, Texas, and he was, you know, in charge of these oil rigs that they were building out in the ocean. And this is his son, you know, George W. Bush, on the oil rigs, probably, you know, during those early years in the 60s. And then, you know, he decided that he was, after the JFK assassination, he was going to get out of the oil business and get into politics and run for senator, you know, just because that's the kind of thing you can do sometimes. I don't, and then he becomes CIA director in 70, you know, under I think 76, under Carter administration, under the House Select Committee on Assassinations. But the day of the assassination, Bush is hanging around with Joe Zeppo of Delta Drilling Company, an oil company that negotiated a lot of international contracts and stuff. So interesting, you know, connections there. And then, of course, George Bush's buddy at the National Guard in 71 becomes the Saudi bin Laden group minister. The connection between the Saudi bin Laden group and the Bush family, sort of like the business liaison or middleman. And they find this bank in Pakistan that was set up, and it just takes off around the same year that George Bush takes over the CIA and tells everyone that he's going to clean up the CIA. And of course, you know, it looks a lot like they moved a lot of a lot of the banking stuff. A lot of the guys that came into BCCI and set up the banking and really like took over the company with their money and investment and experience at that time were these inside CIA kind of guys that we have to then realize that who came from this JFK aftermath of what was created in that birth. We saw between, you know, the CIA intelligence and organized crime. You know, this is essentially what we see in the government, is this organized crime element that's able to infiltrate all aspects of government, sort of making this agreement with in the intelligence community and the banking establishment. You know, and of course,
It just normalizes these criminals as government agents, thus okaying this like whole industry and government operation of crime and corruption, right? Because it's like
well, it's morphed to the rest of the bank,
together.
because you look at all the, since the 1970s, what has happened to the banking industries? Look at all the mergers and conglomerates, like how banks have just eaten one another alive, and how they all combat, and what they're all doing behind the scenes to compete is they have to resort to these sleazy tactics that were originated with the BCCI and the CIA, moving all this covert stuff underground, because they were, realizing that, they're have to money launder all this cash that they're bringing in from sending all this opium and heroin home from Southeast Asia, after they bust into the Golden Triangle in Southeast Asia. At that time in the 60s, 90% of the heroin in the world came from this triangle geographically, right? So Russell and Company, we know from the past, Samuel Russell set up the whole opium trading company that led to the whole opium wars of 1839. We know that the Afghanistan had started taking over a lot of the opium market, but then the Taliban took control in 2001 and slashed all the opium crops and dropped the opium production that year down to bare minimum. And then after the U.S. invaded, we of course brought that production right back up to the
all-time highs.
Yeah, to all-time highs and even higher. In 2007, they were producing, I think, 94%. It basically was the new golden triangle of the 21st century. So you look at what they did from a intelligence standpoint, is they set up the war on drugs, because Richard Nixon's part of this whole corrupt cabal. He declares this war on drugs. They're gonna battle drugs, and that just, this was the profit margin for them, and also a big chunk of that profit margin that they got a portion of this that they could use as just liquid cash that they can put towards all kinds of covert and CIA operations and secretive operations and stuff. But this also created all the cartels. This is a war they're never going to win. And this was designed by them to enslave humanity further and further, like CIA agendas across the globe. It's a massive fuck you to the American people, and it's totally anti-American, un-American, and it's all organized crime, because the people that set this up and did this were the same people that outlawed heroin back in the 30s. It's Russell and Company, because after Russell and Company got kicked out of Canton and during the opium wars, right, in the 1840s and everything, they moved to the U.S. and realized that they were a lot of war profiteers and war profiteering for the Civil War. They got into a whole business doing I forget what they exactly did during the Civil War and how that was connected, but they're basically, they helped outlaw heroin to begin with, because you used to be able to buy pharmaceutical heroin over the counters back in like the 20s and 30s, and it was even lower. The use was just nobody knew about the stuff, and then it really kicked off in the 30s. After they had outlawed it in the United States, so that was the first big wave. And then they had started to combat it, and it came back down after World War II, and then something happened again, that they wanted to get everyone hooked on stuff. So it's really the whole opium war is a big, and the drug understanding how the drug markets work and function with the banks and with the intelligence community, with the large amounts of liquid cash that they produce, and how they're able to fund armies like the army in Mexico that the cartel runs, which is pretty much, I think it runs the Mexican army. I think they even run the Mexican government. It's gotten so big. So it's huge. So the governments are all corrupt and in on it. And we, the people, suffer. We get fucked. Bill Clinton's right here in the mix of it, of course. And he's, running CIA operations in Mena, Arkansas. That's how he gets into president. This no-name senator from Arkansas, or he's the governor from Arkansas, and I don't even think he was in Congress or the Senate. Like a lot of other guys were.
I always wondered why and where he came from, and it makes so much more sense.
Yeah, once you see that Mina connection and understand the Clinton Chronicles and Vince Foster and the whole story of Rose Law Firm there, and really dig it. Yeah, I don't have time to dig into that here. I just know that Bill Clinton was going after Osama bin Laden. He knew about Osama bin Laden. They were going after him, and the CIA basically blocked and stopped him and let him get away continuously under Clinton. They were running him because they didn't, fully have Clinton in their pocket like they had Bush. So this whole time they're running a Harkin energy scam, and then the Enron energy scam, and a lot of that bankrolls the Bush run for the White House with Karl Rove running his PR campaign. They talk about how they did research on the whole Christian Catholic Bible Belt community, and they basically rebranded Bush's image to make him look like a Christian with his wife, so that they could win that Bible Belt vote. And yeah, they really just understood, psychological manipulation on a social scale, and also how to win presidential elections. The swing states, how to cheat the swing states, how to all of the tricks of the game of getting people elected. And then, of course, they guaranteed him, a skull and bonesman getting reelected in 2004 when he ran against fellow skull and bonesman John Kerry, as his running opponent. So it just it goes to show you how contrived it was. And then, of course, Ron Paul was the big vote in 2008 for the election there, and they really baited and switched him with Barack Obama. Barack Obama kind of came out of nowhere, and they really branded Barack Obama as this
The change. We
the
got
change. Yeah, he
change.
was going to bring real change. A black president. Wow, that's really change. We're changing the skin color. This is awesome. They're changing so much. Look, we elected a black
They
guy.
gave him the Nobel Peace Prize before he took office, and then he invaded. There was more American military invasions of sovereign countries under Obama than any other president, I believe.
And he blew up the whole NSA spy program under Obama. It really went full force. I mean, Bush set up the whole legislation for it, but he didn't abuse it because it's like a frog boiling water. No, you set up all this legislation, you don't use it, you don't abuse it, and then you pass it on to the next guy to let him do it in secret. And then yeah, all that. And then, of course, Biden gets in there. Biden was, Obama's vice president. Biden's been like a career yes man for his whole life. And of course, that whole connection leads up to the 9/11 inside job, and what we're going to talk about here tonight. Because as I mentioned, the CIA directors, if you understand who the CIA director was from the 93 World Trade Center bombing up until 9/11 and beyond, it really gives you the full perspective on everything that is going on, and has been going on. So John Brennan is the point man. He's the head of the Saudi station in Saudi Arabia for the CIA, and makes all these connections with the Saudis.
Really? I
He's
never knew that.
John Brennan. You know about the 19 hijackers, right? Well, 15 out of the 19 hijackers were from Saudi Arabia, and 12 of those guys got their visas through John Brennan. And we're going to get into the whistleblower who blew that open in just a second. Louis Freeh, the former director of the FBI, he resigns a month, I think September 1st. No, not the September 1st. Yeah, maybe look up when Louis Freeh resigns from the FBI and puts Mueller in charge. It's right before 9/11. I think it might have been June. But he's now Louis Freeh, the former FBI director, right before 9/11, resigns, and now he's the attorney for Bandar bin Sultan. Well, it turns out that they kept that part about who financed the hijackers secret for decades, and then finally
It was Bandar.
they released those 28 redacted pages. Well, those pointed to Bandar, and Bandar is a good friend of Bush. I mean, Bush invited Bandar to the Bush compound in Kennebunkport, Maine. This guy's well connected and protected. So why he hasn't been arrested and they haven't gone after him, or there hasn't been any kind of anything at all in retaliation to that declassified information that points directly to Bush. And then we find out, well, Bush has got more connections to the Saudi family through James Bath and the Saudi bin Laden group. And then his buddy Bandar bin Sultan's funding the 9/11 hijackers through a middleman named Omar al-Bayoumi. And that also somewhat connected with these I don't know what the connection is here exactly, but Yassin al-Qaidi, a former P-Tech investor, was investigated by Operation Green Quest, and he was a P-Tech investor. And P-Tech was, again, this company which was in 1999, MITRE Corporation collaborated with P-Tech to develop software to help with interoperability between the FAA and NORAD in case of emergencies. So they bring in this Saudi company to help build the software that's going to protect FAA and NORAD during, emergencies. And P-Tech software is used to simultaneously coordinate FAA with NORAD and the Secret Service. Oh, whoa. So if you want to,
the guy running all the ops.
Yeah, basically this is COG. This is continuity of government program, because when you deal with the Secret Service and controlling the president and all that stuff, that this core group is the COG group. So the P-Tech software being developed by MITRE Corporation in 1999, 2 years before 9/11, this gets installed, and this is what they're using now in all the, the MITRE Corporation builds a lot of this infrastructure. When you see those computer rooms with all that crazy stuff, you're like, well, who's the contractor that builds all that crap for the military? Well, this is one of them. And John Deutsch is, of course, a big collaborator at MITRE Corporation and connected with that. And, so interesting connections there with John Deutsch, who's again, he's CIA director up until 1996, and we'll talk about that in a second, and get to that. So Shafiq bin Laden is meeting with President George H.W. Bush the morning of 9/11. So the former president, and the president's father, former President George H.W. Bush, is there with James Baker, and they're meeting with Shafiq bin Laden on this Carlyle Group meeting business. Now, we talk about, the bin Laden family is just one of the richest families in Saudi Arabia, and they look at Osama as like their angry, pissed off son that is using his money and connections to, bomb embassies for the U.S. because he hates the U.S. so much around the world. And, he's just a black sheep for the family. And, they don't really care about him, but they're happy to pick up
of sorts.
Yeah, he's our black sheep of the family. We don't really, we just want to have business with the Bushes and discuss, who's going to get the contracts to rebuild Iraq after they level the place. So we'll agree to sacrifice our delinquent fuck up son, and my brother or whatever have you, to get the deal going. So that's basically what we see is the basis for a lot of this 9/11 stuff. I mean, CIA. Let's get into the CIA directors and these companies and these people, because we just started talking about it last night. I covered some of this stuff. We talked about the Saudi head of intelligence. He resigns. He worked there for his entire life, his entire career from 1979, and he resigns 10 days before 9/11. Knew something was up.
Not sus at all. Not
suspicious at all. Not like Khashoggi's murder is suspicious at all. And and well, who knows what happened there. I'd love to interview the guy and talk to him. He seems super nice. BCCI, founded in 1972. Again, this investigative journalist, Joseph Trento, has dug into BCCI, and there's a whole secret history of the CIA as well. The officers were sophisticated international bankers whose apparent objective was to keep their affairs secret while committing fraud on a massive scale. Boom. And then we talk about Rumsfeld, comes from the Ford administration with him and as a staffer with him and Dick Cheney. They're both put into this continuity of government program, the COG program. They're sent to Andrews Air Force Base every weekend for like 8 years, where their job is to like plan out events just like 9/11 and how and then figure out how the government would respond and come up with the planning, disaster scenario planning think tanks is what they did for COG for decades. And well, he was also running a bunch of other businesses and helping businesses capture agencies of government. Like he helped Pfizer, GD Searle LLC, to basically get the FAA to approve aspartame. Aspartame should never have been approved. It's a poison. Tastes sweet, but it's a trick of the chemical molecule. It's really just, it's worse for you than sugar. And so he got it approved with his help of his ability to capture regulatory agencies like the FDA. So we've already talked about, regulatory agency capture control with Pt2 software on the FAA and NORAD and the whole Secret Service and that infrastructure. Now let's talk about some of the other, things that were going on, because both of these guys, Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, were a member of were on the Foreign Policy Advisory Board for Solomon Smith Barney, and they quit that job to join the Bush administration. So Solomon Smith Barney owned 85% of the floors inside World Trade Center Building 7. It was the largest tenant in Building 7 on 9/11. We talk about the Armageddon plan, how they basically set up these COG disaster think tanks with these. I mean, this was Reagan. This was Reagan era stuff, and Reagan was running the Star Wars program at the time, thinking about intercontinental ballistic missiles, and we need to set up the satellite system around the globe where we can triangulate. And GPS was just starting; it was only being used by the military. It wasn't yet for civilian and commercial use until like the mid to late '90s. It came out, and so this was the early dawn of them figuring out this technology. So on the day of 9/11, Rumsfeld leaves his office, right? He's supposed to be the guy in charge. He's trained for this his whole life,
Supposed to be
done
the
these
one
think
that's in
tanks.
the bunker doing the continuation of government.
He's supposed to be on COG. He's supposed to be, raising the DEFCON level to DEFCON 4 and going underground and bunkering up. And instead, he's right out in the White House lawn helping, personnel evacuate bodies out of the building. Like, what is going on? What, I mean, he's dead now, so you can't arrest him or subpoena him, and I guess it's moot talking about him. But it just boggles my mind that someone who was part of this, who trained for years on how to respond to these types of events, would just leave his post to go out on the Pentagon lawn, and until finally he realizes I should maybe go do something else.
Right, while still under attack. It's like it's the exact opposite thing he's been trained to do his entire career, unless that
Unless,
it's
of course,
staged and you want to be on camera.
unless you want to be a photo op for a hero, you have this plan. Yeah, this is crazy. And then, of course, Dick Cheney running the underground bunker. He went to the underground bunker right away, and he was running the show. Kept pushing the well-publicized photo op in the classroom all day. Didn't move him. The Secret Service didn't move Bush either. We'll talk about that in a second, towards the end of this. But again, John P. O'Neill was the FBI's expert on Osama bin Laden. These were the guys that were tracking, these people for our our intelligence agencies and our government, right? So John P. O'Neill, he's the expert on bin Laden, and they reassign him. They take him off the case just before. And he's like, what the fuck? We're about to get this guy. He's about ready to do this major attack. Like, why the fuck would you reassign me from this case? He quits his job at the FBI out of like disgust about like what is going on internally. Like, why did the cigarette smoking man behind the desk take me off this case? We're about to, bust bin Laden. And he's like, well, I got to stop this friggin' attack from happening. I'm going to get a job at the World Trade Center. And he dies like his first day on the job at the World Trade Center. They make all this, these, if you read about him online, they try to make him out like this hero, the man who knew. And, they really try to change around his story and stuff to hide the fact that the FBI like blocked this man from capturing and investigating and then possibly whistleblowing and telling the truth afterward. So there's a whole documentary called Who Killed John O'Neill, and that was one of the early ones I watched on 9/11 that got me down the rabbit hole on this stuff. It's an old one, Who Killed John O'Neill. Anyways, Able Danger was a CIA terrorist tracking program that was the CIA was running with cooperation with DIA and the NSA, and basically the CIA director George Tenet reassigned all these people and then closed down Able Danger like right before 9/11. And Anthony Schaefer was like, what the fuck? Like we were going after Mohammed Atta, and I was personally like, blowing up memos and emails about Mohammed Atta to my bosses, and these guys came in and squashed the whole thing. So obviously that the CIA and FBI were setting this up, because Louis Freeh gets out of the FBI and puts Mueller in charge. But right before he got out, he had set up this whole FBI retreat for all the important people that would in the FBI went on like a company retreat the week of September 11th. So all the agents were in California.
You all on vacation on a group work retreat.
The entire Joint Terrorism Task Force. This is according to news reports from the day. So that needs to be investigated. What the hell happened there? 3 key whistleblowers for this. J. Michael Springman is the whistleblower who worked at Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, personally denied those hijackers their visas, and was told by his superior, John Brennan, to approve them. FBI whistleblower.
John Brennan again.
Sibel Edmonds, yeah, well, that's the whistleblower I mentioned before. I didn't name him yet. Susan Lindauer, again, she's a CIA whistleblower, talks about they had this plan to go into Iraq, already set up and on the table with Condi Rice and Philip Zelikow and those guys. Sibel Edmonds, her story is still classified. She can't tell the whole story. Still, they've gagged her. They still say like you cannot speak and tell like what you know. But she was an FBI translator for the whole bin Laden thing, and she was like, I was translating all this stuff to the FBI, and the intelligence that they were reporting wasn't what I was translating. They were just hearing what they wanted or manufacturing whatever they wanted. And this was when they were manufactured all the yellow cake evidence for the weapons of mass destruction that we used to invade Iraq illegally. Of course, Iraq didn't have anything to do with it. Iraq isn't even on the countries of any of these. None of these guys were from Iraq. 15 of them, I was mentioned, were from Saudi Arabia, and the others were from Pakistan and Yemen and United Arab Emirates, I believe. So weird group. CIA Director George Tenet is really where this a lot of this starts, because Tenet blocks these guys from investigating, takes Able Danger off. He's cultivated all these close relationships with Saudi Arabian businessmen and rulers and stuff, and really feel like he got corrupted by this whole network as well. We talked about Louis Freeh and Bandar, but Robert Mueller is another interesting thing, because he's the sixth director of the FBI. He takes over, September 4th, 2001, and then works for until September 4th, 2013. And in 1991, Mueller declared the government had been investigating the Bank of Credit and Commerce International since 1986, and more than unusual media exposure. So he kind of slipped up with that one, that they had known about this for quite a while before they busted these guys. And the BCCI connection, again, Mueller is an interesting character, because he gets thrown in charge by Louis Freeh right before 9/11, and kind of takes the reign and holds the cover up down for 13 years, 12 years while this is all running. Talk about NORAD, the whole DEF CON system, how that Pt2 software was just installed, and this brand new state-of-the-art system that they were going to use to track and coordinate threat protection against threats. Talk about all the commanders in the straight in the line of command that failed. Eberhardt was the man most responsible for the failures to intercept those 4 hijacked aircraft. He was the one that he lied to Congress, and they lied to the 9/11 Commission. There's documented evidence of this. I'm not going to go into it all right here, but people can do the you're a crazy tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist. Go look up Global Guardian, Vigilant Warrior, and Northern Vigilance. Those are the 4 war games that were being run on the morning of 9/11, involving Space Command, NORAD needs. And FEMA also had their Tripod 2 bioterrorism drill planned in New York City the morning of 9/11, and those FEMA forces were actually diverted to help with the World Trade Center recovery and disaster emergency. So the FAA, of course, was headed, the guy just the day before 9/11, he decides he doesn't want to be a Wall Street lawyer anymore, and he wants to, become head of the FAA. Like, very little experience. And
Wall Street lawyer to head of FAA. And this is before DEI hires.
Yes. So Benedict Slimy comes in and becomes head of the FAA, fails on 9/11, miserably, blames incompetence. Oh, how could I have known? I just, I wasn't really cut out for the job, I guess. And I guess I shouldn't have this job, and I'll give it to somebody else. And he resigns. Weird, right? Then we look at the FAA hijack coordinator. He's career in special operations, JSOC commander, 1996 to 1998. He did like a ton of special ops stuff in Vietnam and whatnot. But they stopped in 1998 plan to capture Osama bin Laden. Ran training exercise very close to the 9/11 plot just 9 months before 9/11. And in May 2001, Canavan wrote an internal FAA memo telling FAA to back off enforcing airport security corrections. What's that about? So they were like, FAA was going after, security corrections, and he like, you back off those security precautions. We don't, as the hijack coordinator, we don't have to worry about that.
We have some plane hijackers coming through with some box cutters here.
Yeah, we'll get to those hijackers. They did. It's fact. It shows all their actions point to them as being guilty. Hugh Shelton, the SOCOM commander, from 1996 to 1998, he was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff on 9/11, curiously missing from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. the morning of 9/11, just out of place. Everything was in chaos because these key people were just not doing their jobs and doing other stuff. All of them. Like Canavan and Shelton, Richard Armitage, another guy who was special ops in Vietnam, betrayed Valerie Plame's identity as a CIA agent after the invasion of Iraq. Yes, Armitage was the guy that that revealed Valerie Plame's identity. He was the guy. He was present on the secure video teleconference the morning of 9/11, which failed to stop the attacks, and he worked with Pakistani ISI and Mujahideen pre-Al-Qaeda. Now, Brian Michael Jenkins. He was 1972, at age 30, he launched RAND's terrorism research program. Okay. So this is interesting because 72 would have been the time that Carol Rawson was working there for Werner von Braun, right? Where she says that, Werner von Braun, told her that they had this plan for that, it was going to be the communists. And when the communist threat ran out, it would be the terrorists. And then when the terrorists ran out, it would be the final card. The final card is a threat from above. Right, right. So when I look at Brian Michael Jenkins' career, he looks, somewhat similar to like a Lou Elizondo in a lot of ways, is the guy who's going to take us from the communist threat to the terrorist threat. He starts researching the terrorism threat in 1972. 1988, citing the economically collapsing Soviet Union, he wrote this whole essay and paper that a new enemy was needed in the coming years for the military-industrial complex. So, when you think about that whole X-Files plot from that X-Files spinoff, where they were talking about needing a new enemy, this guy wrote about it and called it all out, and then in 1989 to 1998, he becomes deputy chairman of crisis management for Kroll Associates. Well, Kroll's hired by the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey to assess the risk management for the World Trade Center for terrorist attack and design the systems, of the security systems and everything else at the World Trade Center. So Kroll has this big World Trade Center security connection. They helped the 1993 World Trade Center bombing response and assessed the idea of an aircraft attack on the World Trade Center before 9/11. They wrote about it.
They just happened to plan it out ahead of time. Eh?
Really interesting. So and then Jerome Hauer, the managing director at Kroll Associates.
Hold on. We gotta pause and find that initial report because I'm fascinated. Like I want to know if they came to the conclusion that jet fuel would make these towers come down or not. What was their original conclusion?
Okay, well, we're going to get to that. We're not going to pause it. We'll get back to that because the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, there's more to talk about there, and we'll get to that in a second. As National Security Advisor with the National Institute of Health, Jerome Hauer advised Bush officials to start taking Cipro just weeks before those American-made anthrax attacks on U.S. senators who were calling for a new 9/11 investigation.
What?
So, yeah,
so just before the anthrax comes out, they advise all their allies to start.
Jerome Hauer was the one. Yeah, he's the guy that tells, hey, listen, all the White House staff should start taking Cipro. We think there's going to be an attack. And then a bunch of these senators who are all, Senator Tom Daschle and office was targeted because they were calling for a new investigation of 9/11. And they scared him off saying that it was the terrorists who did it, But it turns out it was Bruce Ivins, and then Stephen Hatfield had gotten blamed at one point, but they're pretty sure it was Bruce Ivins, the one who took that Ames strain out of Fort Detrick, Maryland, and then helped attack U.S. senators to scare them off investigating 9/11. And well, Bush then, instead of investigating right away, he was able to push off. They didn't form the 9/11 Commission until 444 days after 9/11. It took him over a year to form the investigation of 9/11. So the Saudi bin Laden group, again, we talked about the Jim Bath connection. Another thing we didn't talk about was the Safari Club, a covert alliance of intelligence services formed in 1961 that ran clandestine operations around Africa at a time when the United States Congress had limited power of the CIA. So basically, Carter had shut down the CIA's ability to operate because he was, in putting them under the House Select Committee on Assassinations, investigating everything that was going on with them. And so this group comes out and they start running. They start basically doing CIA operations. Ted Shackley, a guy who was part of the whole, they called him the White Ghost because he never wanted to be photographed. And he was part of the JM Wave station in Cuba. Definitely knew Bush and all these guys. But he set up initiated a lot of the contacts with these groups, and they were basically running these, Israel peace treaty. They initiated the 1979 Israel peace treaty in lieu of the CIA, but they were basically operating in the same kind of manner. Very interesting. And then the Kissinger group, again, having all these connections with Henry Kissinger being a big piece of this, with his business associates of the Kissinger group, which we'll talk about. And then here's a picture of that, is the Mosh Dayan of Israel, and Kamal Hassan Ali, the head of Egyptian intelligence.
He literally looks like the James Bond villain.
Yeah, doesn't he, huh? He does, right? I'm pretty sure that's where they got the character idea. There's been a lot of other weird characters based on Mosh as well. You can see why. But the BCCI scandal, they're a full-service terrorist financing bank. Rudy Giuliani, his last case as a prosecutor for the district attorney's office of New York State, was prosecuting BCCI. He left the prosecutor's office after that case, and then he went and joined and worked for White and Case, the law firm which defended BCCI during that case. So he's flipped sides. Definitely
wasn't paid off at all. No,
not paid off at all. Not mafia. Not connected to this big CIA scandal that he helped cover for or anything. It's not like he would be a good man in place on the day of 9/11 to cover for the CIA again or any kind of covert operations. It's not like he's done that sort of thing before, So we can totally trust, Rudy, and of course his sidekick Bernard Kerik. The two guys that, as Bush's, as Trump's lawyer, Rudy and Bernard were essentially huge part. They deleted all their posts now off X, but they were hyping up January 6th hard. It's like these two guys were the drum beaters in the ring, for January 6th, dude. If you look at it, like they've deleted all their posts since then, but these two were the deep staters in charge of, the police chief of New York on 9/11 and the mayor of New York on 9/11. So both these guys in place, and then Bernard Kerik, of course, being arrested in 2008 or so, I believe 2005 maybe, for conspiracy and corruption charges. Proving, he's such a,
outstanding citizen,
outstanding guy. He's totally not corruptible. Kuwam, he also worked for Kuwam Company. That stands for Kuwaiti American Corporation, a non-governmental organization in the United States that works in the security sector. And so, basically big friends with Bush and the whole Kuwait war thing. He was going to be, they tried to put Kerik in charge of the Iraq after when they invaded Iraq. They gave it to Bremer instead, but Kerik was actually, considered for the job before Bremer. That. The magically undamaged passport was found by
undamaged.
It was found, this went through a fireball and through the building, the building that took out the plane that took out the buildings and the fireball, and this passport fell to the ground. It was found by Kerik's department, and it's been handed in and used as official, evidence in the case against these hijackers were definitely the ones that did it.
Evidence of planted documents. Like, how else could that be taken in a court of law?
It's so bad. Well, in all these cases, we talked about the magic bullet and how the evidence that the government uses for their staged operations is some of the most in your face, fake. It's fake shit. You know what I mean?
It has to be done intentionally, almost to show, document that it was fake for certain classified
I don't
this?
know.
I don't
I
know.
don't. But people buy it. It's used in the trials. Like this was used in the trial. It's evidence in the Zacharias Musawi trial. It's like one of the exhibits. So, again, this is big serious stuff because it's being used to detain and punish people actively right now who
I
may or may
would,
not.
if I was that guy's lawyer, I would like request that passport to be like chemically and analyzed if it went through a jet fire, like
I know, right? It's quite obviously without chemical analysis that it didn't take out glass, building. It didn't, I don't
it
know.
took out a tower, right? Like what?
Maybe if he had it inside his wallet, the wallet protected it, well, and it just the wallet got shredded apart, and then the passport came out, and it was just, this miracle of God, of Allah. I don't know, but anyways, Rudy Deckers. Let's look at the important stuff because these flight terrorists took flight training at a flight school in Venice, Florida, which was run by this guy who's very definitely a CIA pilot. Very much looks like David Ferry and Barry Seal and a number of these other guys, like Jim Bath too, right? Running drugs and guns and stuff, these secret missions for the CIA, in addition to training terrorists at his flight school. And then we find out that Venice, Florida is also home to the Barnum and Bailey Circus, which routinely a lot of the CIA agents would go to Venice, Florida and actually go to Barnum and Bailey Circus as part of their training. They would take clown classes where they learn how to be a clown because clowns can control a room and gain control of get everyone's attention in the room. And so they learn those kind of skills of how to do that. Then they'd go to the magicians and the illusionists, the ones that could cut women in half and, make quarters disappear with their hands. And so they'd teach them sleight of hand, how to pocket stuff and how to switch things in your hand. So like if you got a fake and you want to switch it for a copy for a real one, and all the little tricks of the trade that intelligence agencies have to learn. Well, they go to Venice, Florida and go to Barnum and Bailey to learn that. And so it's weird that this flight school that's training terrorists is operating out of Venice, Florida, because it's just such a historically CIA location in the United States. Mentioned again, very, very odd similarities between all those guys. And then you talk about, the insurance companies on the Twin Towers, because everyone knows about Larry Silverstein, right? But a lot of people don't know all about Larry Silverstein's business connections and who he knows in the business world and who else is involved in all this, because the insurance policy was actually managed by AIG for that handed Larry like the $7 billion or whatever he got for the Twin Towers after he claimed both of them constituted two separate attacks, so he could claim twice the amount. AIG granted him that with very little contest, and it turns out that a number of the policies had been resold to other insurance companies through reinsurance policies, and they took such bad hits that these guys, I don't know, these guys didn't go after AIG for, who was convicted in 2008 of running reinsurance scams. I don't know why no one's ever taken AIG or Larry Silverstein to court for 9/11 and this,
Jeremy, you figured it out. It's the exact opposite. It's that literally the CIA is just a bunch of clowns.
Yes. I mean, you look at what they do. Clearly, we're the clowns for falling for the show and the circus. We keep going to the circus, so I don't know what makes us right. Blackstone Group is a number also very interesting connection there, because we've talked about the Blackstone Group bought out Freescale Semiconductor like the year before MH370 went missing, which is weird connection there. The chain of events in that whole legal insurance case is just weird, but the court eventually decided in Larry Silverstein's favor, and he got a huge payout for the destruction of the Twin Towers and Building 7. And we look into Larry's connections. Well, AIG is run by, has a long history with the CIA. Of course, it was set up by Cornelius van der Star, and used to, basically run. They said that if you wanted to know which factories to bomb and where all the infrastructure was, well, infrastructure had to be insured. So the insurance companies were the people to go to for that intelligence. So they used a lot of that intelligence. And then, of course, AIG present day is run by Maurice Greenberg, whose son is Jeffrey Greenberg, who is the CEO of Marsh & McLennan Companies, which, of course, Marsh & McLennan Companies is right here. They own all the floors in the impact zone of the North Tower where the first plane hits. It's all Marsh & McLennan. That's Jeffrey Greenberg and Paul Bremer, both worked for Marsh & McLennan. They both missed work that day of 9/11. And Bremer goes on the news on MSNBC and is the first person to tell the official story of 9/11 that morning. Nobody's ever heard Osama bin Laden's name before. Most Americans haven't. And L. Paul Bremer is the first person to say that name on national TV. None of them go to work in the World Trade Center that morning. Now, NIST is the first place that we need to look as a government agency that was compromised in the and captured regulatory control. So that they have NIST perform the investigation after people don't buy the official story of 9/11, start having questions about how those towers fell down. We have architects and engineers, and so they got to figure out a way to put these conspiracy theories to bed and really get people to stop paying attention to this stuff. So NIST comes out with this report that they've written. And of course, it turns out that a number of the scientists connected with that report work for another company called SAIC. Now, SAIC, as people know, is involved with the whole Project Stargate stuff, with the Montauk project of testing out what kind of frequencies do what to the human body. And can we erase memories? Can we wipe memories? Can we all that kind of stuff? Can we remote view? Can we do any of this stuff? SAIC was involved with all the investigations into that stuff. Now, SAIC's present day name is Leidos. They changed the name to Leidos Corporation, but they currently make all the airport scanners for the TSA. So they hugely benefited from 9/11. Of course, would want to write this report favoring the idea that we have these dangerous terrorists, that we need to give up our freedoms and force this agency called the TSA to run in every airport, increasing my flight wait times at the airport by over an hour, because I have to go through this massive security checkpoints, which are totally invasive and take 3D scanned images of my biometric data of my entire naked body, see through my clothes. And it turns out that the company that ran security at the World Trade Centers on 9/11 was Securicom Stratesec. The World Trades, they didn't run security at the World Trade Centers. That's a misconception. They actually had the contracts to install all the camera systems and electronic security and badging at the World Trade Center. And the COO of that corporate, on the board of directors, of course, was Marvin Bush, the president's brother, which is an interesting connection. The president's brother, on the board of directors for the security company that's got these contracts for the World Trade Center. They also have contracts at Dulles International Airport and United Airlines, which is super curious. And the COO of this company is a guy named Barry W. McDaniel, who it just so happens is now the vice president division manager at Leidos Corporation. Weird. He's running security at the World Trade Center on 9/11, and now he's the division manager or vice president at Leidos Corporation that made tons of money off airport scanners after 9/11. And then we look into, well, who could have set up and wired the World Trade Centers? As we mentioned before, Bernie talked about the connection with, who at 93, figured out how to bring the towers down, because they must have known how much jet fuel, if the plane, how fast it would need to, all the important engineering characteristics would have been learned through that bomb that went off in 1993. So in 93, when they bombed the World Trade Centers, they'd have to hire this company. This company, Tridata Corporation, gets the contract to investigate. And Tridata Corp comes in and writes the whole World Trade Center report, and they do an engineering. They get all the blueprints and all, and they have to figure out how much they know exactly how big the bomb was, how much damage it did to the building, and how to repair the building and put it all back together. And they do all that. They manage all that. During the
Well, they
process of that,
manage all that, but do they intentionally take advantage of weaknesses
well,
and
that's what's interesting, because Tridata Corporation is a division of Systems Planning Corporation International, which is, of course, run by Dov Zakheim, the Pentagon comptroller, the morning of 9/11, which is really a weird connection, man. That they'd have this subsidiary. I mean, it's obvious that all these government people work together, but these people become suspects when they're in key positions on the morning of 9/11 to affect all this stuff. And they have that, and they have all that intelligence on how to get the towers to come down, what needs to be done. They write this report, of course, with these guys that all work for these companies and do all these secret research. And that report comes out and says, oh, it's just thermal expansion and floor failure. But you guys are the ones that ran security at the buildings and set up the security systems at the buildings, and also did the first 93 World Trade Center analysis report to determine like how much bombs and where and how to bring the buildings down, because you knew all that about them. Then it turns out that there was this elevator remodernization right before 9/11, in March 2001. They're redoing all the elevator shafts.
the
And
elevator shafts, literally the structure, the core of a building where you would plant your little explosives to
right
take
through the
it.
elevator shafts is where you can access to all that, because no one sees inside those walls. It's all finished on the inside of the towers. But if you're in the elevator shafts doing an elevator remodernization, man, you got full access to the 4-foot crawl spaces in the World Trade Center between floors. They show the trusses and what they look like. There's a 4-foot crawl space between floors. So you get into the elevator shafts, and man, you got like access to these whole buildings, and you could wire them up secretly, and nobody would ever know, because unless they break open a wall or a ceiling, which I'm sure was against the rules. But you get L. Paul Bremer in there working at Marsh McLennan, and he goes right on MSNBC that morning, misses work, and he's on there giving the first official story. He quits his job at Marsh, forms a Marsh crisis division of Marsh, and a whole other division devoted to all this. He's the commissioner on counterterrorism at Harvard, on this big board about counterterrorism at Harvard University too. So all these, key CIA connections that just don't add up. And then he's the point man in Iraq. He's the guy that turns Iraq into a quagmire. They're literally, their job was to make another Vietnam out of it, an unwinnable war that would never end, that they'd have to keep spending on, and it would just cause more problems for the future. It would just be a recurring, sort of, and it's just messed up what they did, and then now he's retired, living in Vermont, and he's, making jokes about, skiing is much more relaxing, and you can see where you're going, unlike Iraq, right? As if it was all a big mistake. But again, he was also on the board of directors for Akzo Nobel, which owned International Paint Company, which developed a fireproofing, spray-on fireproofing for skyscrapers called Interchar. So he was also on the division
Worked too well, or was that after 9/11?
What's that?
Clearly didn't work too well, or was that after
Yeah,
9/11?
no, they put it on, and they had a bunch of fireproofing upgrades in the years before 9/11. I mean, these are 1990 to 2000. There was all these fireproofing upgrades on all these key floors, man. And those were, who knows? They could have just, when they replaced the fireproofing, they could have put spray on thermite.
Oh, absolutely.
Or they could have hidden the thermite charges like those Battelle nanothermite linear shape charges. They could have hidden on these, and then the thermite, I mean, this is like a 4-inch thick charge on the beam, and then you spray over it with 4 inches thick of fireproofing material, and that thing's dead. It's invisible. You've hidden it inside the fireproofing, and even if you did open the walls and examine things, you wouldn't see these explosives in the buildings, you know? And look, they did this light trick on the key floors, right where the planes later hit, right? There's power downs and evacuations made in the buildings. And yeah, there is more going on with 9/11. Then we look at the whole hijacking technology. Well, it turns out that these guys, you know, I talk about Rumsfeld and Cheney and and SPC International, right? Well, those groups that are designing this this software to help coordinate FAA and NORAD and everything, and these groups that are SPC International, I guess, was working with Boeing on this uninterruptible autopilot system. So Boeing developed this uninterruptible autopilot system, and the idea to stop terrorism is that, hey, we have this thing on board that we can just shut off the cockpit controls and fly the plane with autopilot. So we can just automatically set it up to land at whatever airport we want. And then that way, you know, terrorists won't be able to hijack planes at all, because we can just shut things down and fly them by remote control. And so, dude, like, well, if you have all that technology, then you don't need hijackers, because you can just hijack the plane and fly it into the World Trade Center on your own. And it's weird because, you know, UA-175 and UA-11 both cross paths very close to Andrew. This is Stewart Air Force Base. Sorry, Andrews Air Force Base is in Washington, D.C., but Stewart Air Force Base is right here in upstate New York. I mean, a little bit outside the city. And man, it's interesting that both those flights passed over that Air Force Base at the same time. And then you look at the last 12 seconds of UA-175, and there's a very convincing argument that it was computer controlled. That the plane makes, in the last 12 seconds, it makes a single corrective maneuver that was perfectly timed, and then smashes into the World Trade Center. And Flight 93 is
Definitely not the sort of move done by a novice goat herder from the Middle East that just
no,
hijacked the plane.
anyone, you'd fly it in a flight simulator. You wouldn't just wait until, you wouldn't wait a full 9 seconds and then make a single move and then wait 3 seconds and then crash into the building, right? You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't wait 9 seconds at that as you're approaching this building, and you don't, like, you'd be making constant corrections.
For it, like, right? You'd be doing a slow
You'd be going making constant corrections.
Yeah.
Right?
Definitely.
That's a human pilot. Not flight UA-175, and you can look at it. They did an analysis from every single angle. There's a description. By the way, all these slides are in my presentation in the description below. You can click and view, and then there's links in the comments section of every slide. There's links to tons of deep dives, more on this deep dive that you want to fact check anything and dive into it further. Be my guest. And I'd love people to be like, hey, you're wrong at this point right here. Go check this and check these sources. And I'd be like, yes, thank you. I'll make the, you know, and we'll take this down and make a new one with the correction. But I doubt it. We've done a lot of research. Probably just want to add stuff to it. Flight 93, you know, was it blown up? Did it fly into the ground like they said? Did these hijackers, did these guys on board really, you know, let's roll into the cockpit and take back control of the plane and fly it into the ground to prevent it from crashing? Well, it's an interesting story considering the whole the evidence of this, what they're able to do with this flight control technology. And also, when you look at Flight 93, it was scheduled to depart at 8 a.m. and it pushed back from the gate at A17, gate A17 at 8:01 a.m. according to the records, right? but then it remained delayed on the runway, kept delayed on the tarmac until 8:42 because of heavy airport congestion. So AA-11, by the way, hit the North Tower at 8:37. So this plane was supposed to
Planes
take
were
off.
grounded by then, supposedly, weren't they?
Flight 90, no, they weren't. No, didn't happen until 10 a.m. And that happened shortly after. No, we go back to the flights weren't grounded. Right here is 8:37. This was 8:37. This is both paths crossing, right? And then at 8:37, AA hits the North Tower, and then this is cleared for takeoff. 93 was like held on the runway until the AA hits the North Tower, and then it's cleared for takeoff. And then they kind of like kept it there in case. It's like the backup plane. It's like if one of the planes didn't hit their target, they had this one as a backup.
No doubt.
That's the theory anyway. And that when they didn't need it anymore, they just crashed it into the ground. Because they had to make sure that they took both these targets out because of what was at stake in both of them. And Flight 77, a couple interesting people on board. Again, the flight pilot was a big guy, tough guy. And I think that these are the smallest hijackers out of the whole bunch, and they were all on Flight 77, and they supposedly took over the cockpit from this guy. I just can't believe the Todd Beamer story is real. That Todd Beamer took over the cockpit from these guys, but these guys took over the cockpit from Burlingame when Burlingame would take on 2 Todd Beamers. Anyways, Dulles Airport security footage is also really, really weird because, again, Stratosec installed all those cameras. Securicom Stratosec, yeah, the same company that installed all the cameras and badging at the World Trade Center, also did all the cameras at Dulles International Airport. Now, Dulles, their cameras in this bay were, of course, installed by Securicom Stratosec, which had to, incorporate the cameras into this much larger video manager that was run by the whole airport, a much larger system of cameras. So that was called the Lorenix Video Manager from Verint Video Solutions. And David C., who would only identify him as himself as David C., was basically the guy who ran the company at Dulles International Airport. Now, what's weird about the tapes is the timestamp on the tapes has been cropped out of all the images that were originally given. But when they FOIA'd it, they found the timestamp was from actually September 10th, the day before. So it looks like they did a dry run and there's all these inconsistencies. There's actually no footage of any of the hijackers boarding any of the flights the morning of 9/11. The only other footage that we have is from Portland Airport, where Mohammed Atta and Jarrah supposedly took a crossover flight from Portland to Logan, where they got on Flight 11 and 175, right? So this is just weird. And then AMEC's trailers are all out in front of the Pentagon. AMEC was doing a $258 million refurbishment to the whole west wing of the Pentagon in Wedge 1. They had just removed like most of these offices and gotten a lot of those people out, and we're doing rework on all of that whole section of the building. So all the trailers and the generator and the construction trailers all right here all belong to AMEC. And that's right in the same wing of the building where the terrorists decide to fly the plane. Instead of flying it right over this way into the north wing of the building, where
right, just magically take it into the most difficult, close to ground area that's under construction,
and also at a low approach angle where you're going to hit all those poles. There's it's just AMEC Corporation again is run by Peter Jansen, and he's a contractor from Canada. Very close ties to Donald Rumsfeld, very good friends with Donald Rumsfeld. They get all the contracts. They get another $258 million contract to rebuild the Pentagon after 9/11. So they just make double the money on that. And then they're also immediately hired to help clean up the World Trade Center site in New York City. and they're the ones managing most of like the real deep action on all the thermite burning pile of rubble that burned for 9 months, three entire months underground until December 19th, 2001. The last fire was put out underground after spraying the pile down with over 1 million gallons of PyroCool FEF fire retardant foam mixture. Really crazy stuff. Again, done some of the math on the people that died at the Pentagon just to dispel some of the other theories that, you know, it was a low number. It's about what we'd expect to be in that section of the Pentagon, now that I've ran the numbers on a low estimate. But again, Flight 93, Flight 77, there was a lot of people on that flight that just were vacant. It was not a full flight. Really weird. And a lot of weird names, as we mentioned in that one slide, of people on that flight. For people, this is all for the task force to really investigate and come out with. But again, some of the things, there's definitely the no plane theory that came out.
That security footage, the most secure building in the world, doesn't have a decent video of an airplane flying into it. Like, no, there's got to be like at least 30 angles of it recorded, yet no, there was nothing but
Yeah,
construction.
also the footage of those hijackers from Dulles Airport, which looks like it was staged, is shot at 30 FPS. So if Dulles had the ability to shoot at 30 FPS, then the Pentagon's seriously slacking.
Right? Like, no, nobody believes that.
No, I don't think they should. But a lot of people were believing this no plane theory, that no plane hit the Pentagon. But this is a picture with clearly a ton of plane debris all over the Pentagon lawn, freshly after it crashed, before the wall collapsed, and before Donald Rumsfeld went out there and, you know, destroyed all the evidence and picked up all the plane debris and spread those vicious theories about there being no planes to throw off the conspiracy theories, you know. There was a ton of early disinfo that came out on no plane theories. One of the main guys was this former Bush economist named Morgan Reynolds. He wrote a paper with Judy Wood. And then another guy that came out with big on no plane theory was actually the highest ranking person to ever come out on, 9/11 as a 9/11 conspiracy theorist, a former general named Albert Stubblebean. And I believe that, his point in joining 9/11 was to spread disinformation about the no plane theory, and to really, he spread stuff about the demolition theories, but he also went towards the Judy Wood stuff.
And again, psychological warfare departments,
At Fort Meade,
aka
yeah, in Maryland, he was one of the guys who started the Men Who Stare at Goats thing, and then he also worked for BDM International.
and colleague of Hal Puthoff.
Huh? Yeah. Well, Cal Puthoff worked at Fort Meade in the U.S. Army Psychological Warfare Center. That was the Psi Spies. That was the whole original Psi Spy. That was Project Stargate and all that stuff. So he's connected to all that. But BDM is another interesting connection, because BDM is where we find, BDM was purchased by Ford Aerospace and became a part of Ford Motor Company in 1988. As we mentioned in yesterday's thing about the Ford Aerospace connection, and where Ford Aerospace come from with Ford Philco, and the whole history there with Ford Motor Company, Robert McNamara leaving his $3 million a year position at Ford Motor Company to become Secretary of Defense in 1960, where he was only making $250,000 a year. There had to be some incentive to take a pay cut like that. So again, Ford Aerospace was sold to L'Oreal, and BDM was spun off into the Carlyle Group. And in 1997, BDM was purchased by TRW, Aerospace Systems and Technical Services Company. But Barry McDaniel used to work for BDM before he, of course, became the CEO of Stratesec at the World Trade Center security firm, right? Running security at the World Trade Centers. And then now he's working at Leidos Corporation, which builds all the body scanners at the airports, right? So interesting connections there. And then we look into this whole, what Vinnell Corporation was, because BDM, in 1992, Vinnell was acquired by BDM International, which was in turn acquired by TRW in 1997. and then TRW, sorry, not M, that should be a W typo, was acquired by Northrop Grumman in 2002. So it all goes into Northrop Grumman, right? But Vinyl Corporation and BDM are right there in this whole mix with a group called the Beltway Companies, and that's the Beltway Companies is DynCorp and all those guys. So DynCorp, Vinyl, and then again the Carlyle Group, as we know, from 1999 to 2001, EG&G was bought out by the Carlyle Group right before 9/11. EG&G, the main contractor at Area 51, gets bought out by the Carlyle Group, which is Frank Carlucci, who used to be Stubblebean's boss at BDM International, right? Who used to be Barry McDaniel's boss at BDM International. So Frank Carlucci in the Rand Corporation, he's the Carlyle Group chairman from 1992 to 2001. But before that, he was the Secretary of Defense for the Reagan administration. People don't remember. Okay. Now, PNAC, the Project for the New American Century, super important part of this whole business. Because Paul Wolfowitz, big member of PNAC, he's the Deputy Secretary of Defense on 9/11 under Donald Rumsfeld, also a member of PNAC, and he's the guy who led the Pentagon rebuilding project run by AMEC Corporation. Now, the 100 Plan for America, they talk about in the document Rebuilding America's Defenses. They say, like, we want to turn, this whole military industrial complex into being more popular and profitable, and we can't do that without some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. We need 9/11 basically is what they called for in this document, which they published right before 9/11. And these are all the guys that are involved with it. Just look at the list. We got Joe Biden. Okay. Well, that's where Joe got in on all this. I wondered where he got his whole foot in the door on this presidency thing with, being an
They're like,
incompetent moron and
it's
all.
100-year plan, not year to run America while you're 100.
Oh, yes, right, yes. John Kerry, of course, ran against the Skull and Bones member who ran against Bush in 2004. Really exposed that whole thing. A lot of people don't know too much about a lot of these other players, but we all know Jacob Rothschild. We all know George Soros. Actually, that's
John
David
Bolton
Rockefeller.
down there.
I don't know why it says George Soros, but it's got a picture of David Rockefeller. But yeah, people know John Bolton, right? Paul Wolfowitz, we talked about him. Richard Pearl, another one definitely worth mentioning and looking into.
Soros is next to Rockefeller, though, so they've switched. They messed
Bill
up.
Kristol, another guy going nuts with the whole deep state Doge probe. Cannot stand this. Hillary Clinton, very interesting, Secretary of State in New York, there in New York City for 9/11. Barack Obama. What, Barack Obama? Part of this, this guy was pre 9/11. Like, this is years before we heard of Barack Obama, and he's part of this.
What?
This group? Oh, wow, very interesting. Well, it turns out that the person who wrote that line about needing a new Pearl Harbor, like needing 9/11 for their PNAC plan, was a guy named Dov Zakheim, who was in charge of the Pentagon, the third in charge of the Pentagon on 9/11, the comptroller. And he was the CEO of Systems Planning Corporation, which Systems Planning Corporation, Tridata Corporation is a division of SPC International, right? Tridata Corporation did the investigation of the World Trade Center bombing in 93, right? Boom. It's right there. Tridata Corp. You can go look it up. I have the link to the official report for the 1993 bombing. And it's done by Tridata Corporation, which is a subsidiary of this guy's company. And he was the guy that wrote this line for PNAC. And I mean, come on, guys.
Wow. So the guy that was in charge of studying the original World Trade Center bombing was also the guy that wrote the 100-year Plan for America that also owns the company that does the computer stuff and was third the comptroller at the Pentagon at the time.
Now, there was this white mystery plane over the Pentagon and the White House on 9/11 flying around. A lot of people think it might have been an E-4B or one of these other AWACS controller planes. It's called, look up AWACS plane. And this plane might have been controlling the whole, or at least monitoring the situation, for the government. People on who's on the board this plane? Where was this flight, and who was on that flight? Looks like the continuity of government doomsday planes, Then you talk about the uninterruptible autopilot technology and Systems Planning Corporation, the 25 years of radar expertise and the radar systems that they've, helped work on. It's just, then the autopilot patent was granted in 2003. There's the Philip McKinney Pippinger patents. The anti-terrorism auto land system for airliners, boats, and cars, right? Pilotless aircraft control. Here's the timeline of it all. We talk about it goes back to 1947 with Glenn Martin Company and the earliest drone aircraft program, which Lewis Whitten was worked on for them. And then in 1966, NASA launches Pageos, this giant sphere satellite, which was the improved terrestrial triangulation of the globe by orders of magnitude. So the first GPS coordination, getting their GPS systems coordinated, they used this giant silver balloon. And then 1976, 1979, Teledyne Ryan out in San Diego, California, building and testing those pilotless black triangle aircraft. We've talked about that. We'll get into that in part 3, hopefully tomorrow. Then the 1978 Navstar, first one, GPS satellite by U.S. Air Force. We talk about the COG disaster think tanks, the whole Star Wars program under Reagan, setting up this global GPS and tracking system. The guys who were in charge of that and building all this infrastructure to protect the nation should have been well prepared and just were doing weird stuff instead and let those systems fail or break on purpose so that they could have other agendas at play, because it looks like a lot of them had business clients and opportunities that they both profited off of way more massively than anything. I mean, they had all these the agendas at play for the people that carried out 9/11. It's interesting and complex because you look at Kissinger Associates, and Kissinger was placed in charge of the 9/11 Commission when they first opened a 9/11 investigation 444 days after 9/11. Kissinger gets put in charge of the investigation, and Lori Van Aken, the Jersey Girls, are hired to this committee to help guide the 9/11 Commission and be a steering committee with questions from victims' family members, and they didn't expect them to really get involved with high quality researchers and get a hold of good questions and good information, because she found out that Kissinger has a company called Kissinger Associates, and one of their clients is the Bin Ladens. And so she asked Kissinger about this Bin Laden connection, and said he just about fell out of his chair and then quit the next day. So Kissinger's out, and he gets replaced by Philip Zelikow, who wrote the preemptive Iraq and war invasion strategy with Condoleezza Rice, before 9/11, big neocon, totally, sets up this commission where, a majority of the documents are not shared with the people, the same way that they set up the Warren Commission to basically have the FBI feed them the evidence that they wanted them to see to draw the conclusions that they wanted them to draw, and hid all the other evidence from them that would allow them to, like the 28 redacted pages and all the other important issues of terrorist financing
and like sending the entire FBI terrorism team on a retreat vacation while this is going down, so they can't do anything to then be called in later, right?
Right. And quitting the FBI, putting a cover-up expert like Robert Mueller in charge of the FBI just before 9/11, and then now being, Louis Freeh now being the attorney for Bandar bin Sultan, the guy who funded those 19 hijackers through Almor al-Bayoumi. Yeah, it's really amazing that more of the senators didn't completely, you know, revolt the way that Max Cleland did. He went on Wolf Blitzer on November 13th, 2003, and told him, the only minority of the commission are allowed to see a minority of the documents. He called the 9/11 Commission a scam on live TV in that interview. There's a link to it down below. People can go and watch that and check that out. Condoleezza Rice line about foreknowledge of 9/11 really amazing too, because she's under oath, talking to the 9/11 Commission, and they ask her if she could ever have known if there was no warning signs. We could have never known. And then they bring up this August 16th memo, and she just like, oh, she just denies all the evidence that there were people sending you warnings saying bin Laden's going to attack us, and you guys ignored all this stuff and let it happen. So there's a faction of the
And
government
fired them and sent them on vacations and like,
Well,
oh my
also all the people that failed got promotions. All Eberhard, all these guys got medals of honor. Paul Bremer got a medal of honor. All these guys got medals of honor for the rewards. And the real whistleblowers like Barry Jennings, they cut his testimony from the 9/11 Commission. The same way that we talked about all those Warren Commission witnesses that got their testimony cut from the Warren Commission to push a particular narrative by the government. The same thing happened with 9/11. The William Rodriguez story is an excellent example of this, because Hillary Clinton was trying to take this guy on, and she tried to mind control him. She tried to basically, you listen to Willie's testimony. He says that, Hillary Clinton was basically promising me that I was going to become a senator, promising me all this power and positions and all this glory. But I had to go along with her narrative on 9/11. And when I started speaking the truth, she'd get all fucking pissed off and try to get me to not like talk about that kind of stuff. And basically Hillary tried to co-opt this guy and turn him into like one of their stooges, and he wasn't having it. He said, no, I'm going to tell people what really happened, and not going to like embellish or change the story at all. I heard bombs. I saw these workers and the power downs and all this stuff that, I'm not supposed to talk about. But yeah, I saw that. That's a part of history. And you're not going to like delete that from the record. And you can see her in the eyes that she's giving him.
right, like the stare of death. Like,
and when he didn't go along with the official story, man, she dropped him, and they dropped him like a hot potato, man. It's just it's a crazy, crazy story what happened to Willie.
is he still alive?
Yeah, he's still alive, man. You got to interview him.
We need to get that guy back on. He's like the sole survivor of getting the Hillary Clinton death eyes and still being alive.
I know, dude. How do you get that close to Hillary and not get taken out? But yeah, this is crazy because Brennan again in charge of all these other probes and investigations. The deep state is revolves around all these people, and we really need to get into this whole Brennan Clapper connection and the whole CIA and the spies who lie and cover up stuff. Just like they covered up the Hunter Biden laptop and told everyone that it was Russian disinformation. They did the same thing with a lot of the 9/11 stuff. So we start with John Deutsch. John Deutsch was director of the CIA from up until 1996. So when did he start? Because he was there for 93. I believe that Deutsch was there for the 93 World Trade Center bombings and all that. And then he's CIA director up until 1996. So what happens in 1996? But before that, he was United States Deputy Director of Secretary of Defense. And then before that, Under Secretary of Defense for Acquisition and Technology, which is interesting, 93 to 94. And then before that, he worked for MITRE Corp. And so John Deutsch, working for the CIA, this happens. So in October or November of 1996, the CIA goes into Los Angeles and tries to hold a press conference to quell all the city's fear, discussions about the CIA dealing drugs.
Anger and outrage because they were figuring out where their source of this crack cocaine was coming from.
Yes, the anger and outrage because they were all figuring out where this was coming from, and John Deutsch gets on stage and tries to tell them that this isn't happening. That you can bring your evidence here. If you have evidence, you can bring it to the two places. He says you can bring it to LAPD, and that's when Michael Rupert gets up and says, I brought my evidence to LAPD and I was shot at and forced out of, almost forced to resign from my position. He said, I'm an LAPD narcotics detective. I worked the beat for Los Angeles for 20 years. Said the CIA unequivocally deals drugs in this country and has so for many years. And I have a mountain of evidence and proof. And all the people you just told us to bring it to and give it to are the people that will kill you if you do that.
Such an epic clip. Like, it's just
epic,
that's
epic
a piece of
shutdown
American history.
And that is when the CIA realized, oh fuck. Look at the look in John Deutsch's face. He's like, we are fucked. We are so fucked. And that is when he quit. Get the fuck out of that position. I am not dealing with this. Oh my fucking word. And that is when George Tenet becomes director of the CIA. So George Tenet's pulled out of Saudi Arabia, where he's the station chief over in Saudi Arabia, and of course, has all these connections in CIA. He installs John Brennan as the station chief over in Saudi Arabia as CIA. As his replacement over there, who become a future CIA director. And George Tenet comes and takes control of the CIA amid this whole big drug trafficking scandal thing and all that. Colin Powell, of course, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff from 89 to 93, and then Secretary of State from 2001 to 2005, destroyed his career completely with the fake yellow cake evidence for WMDs in Iraq and fabricating that intelligence, which led us into the Iraq War. Will go down forever in history as being, a big, just destroying his career on that. Of course, he was
in the country.
And the whole country. Yeah, and well, the depleted uranium that we left all over there. Yes, definitely. Porter Goss again becomes the director of CIA after George Tenet leaves. So George, somewhere around 2004, he decides, I can't, do this anymore. This is too crazy, especially with Skull and Bones on, being pulled out that they're running Kerry and Bush against each other. People are going to wake up to this, man. This is getting a little too hot for me. So he dips out, and then Porter Goss comes in, the CIA in 2004 to 2005, led the Congressional Joint Inquiry into 9/11. Of course, helps the CIA, to cover up 9/11 with this, by leading the investigation. Again, the same kind of tactic John Deutsch used. If you have evidence, bring it all to us, and we'll make sure we take care of it. Right? Michael Hayden is the general director of the CIA from 2006 to 2009. And he does such a horrible job and is such a terrible boss that he's the reason that William Binney and Thomas Drake, resign from the NSA and become whistleblowers and turn whistleblower in the whole spy program that he's setting up for Obama to really unroll. Right? Then we have Leon Panetta and David Petraeus take over for a very short period of time under Obama. But Obama fires Hayden and can't decide on who he wants to be his CIA director. Goes through him quite quickly until he arrives on John Brennan. And he likes John Brennan. John Brennan is the guy, those Saudi connections and all. But yeah, Michael Springman in his book Visas for Al Qaeda, CIA handouts that rock the world. Read about the whistleblower that I'm surprised C-SPAN even had on and talked about. That's amazing. more people should talk about this stuff. It gets buried, it gets out there, but then it gets buried. It doesn't get recycled in the news cycle, and people fail to really go back and connect the dots. Because we know political lawfare is common. It happens. Bremer left the mess in Afghanistan, and Biden leaves this mess. Biden left this mess in Afghanistan. Bremer leaves left the mess in Iraq, just like Nixon and them left the mess in Vietnam and LBJ. Buzzy Krongard, another interesting connection here. He's the connection from the CIA to Eric Prince of Blackwater running all this, and he's connected with Alvin Bernard Krongard, is connected with the firm that placed these stocks on American Airlines and United Airlines. So some insider trading stuff going on there. Then the whole Enron scandal, Enron being under investigation by the SEC and the CIA, not the CIA, but the SEC and some of the other watchdog agencies inside of Building 7. Apparently, their investigations are thwarted and interrupted with the destruction of Building 7. So the investigation into Enron is basically called off the full-scale investigation into the Enron
Just
WorldCom scandal.
conveniently, all the files of Enron destroyed in Building 7.
Well, it's weird because, they got Ken Lay, and he went to prison, and a bunch of other Enron executives went to prison and stuff, but they never connected, like, the fact that Enron bankrolled the Bush should run to the presidency and all that. So there's interesting scams going on there. Building 7 is definitely the key to the smoking gun of World Trade Center 7. Brings all these companies together with Solomon Smith Barney, which is Citicorp, major banking, major and all the major military industry that benefited from 9/11 massively. And we talk about the lone gunman. The X-Files predicted 9/11 in March 2001. Go watch this episode. It's on my channel. If you go look up 9/11 X-Files on AlienScientist and watch that video, if you want to have all this stuff sort of connected for you in TV, X-Files fashion. They called it all in March, dude. They like show it all in that episode. It's really well job of connecting the dots now that you know where all the dots connect after watching this. But Wesley Clark talked about this future plan for the Middle East. We're going to invade, 7 countries in 7 years, and Iran's going to be last on the list, but it's on there. This whole grand chessboard, this plot, and how we're going to take control. And a lot of these guys who are strategists like wrote all this stuff for our future, and we're predicting this stuff in early 2000 when this all went down. There's a whole book called Petrodollar Warfare about the Iraq and oil and the future of the dollar, and how Saddam Hussein had tried to switch the oil currency to euros shortly before 9/11, so that we had to go.
And he was also trying to do a gold back dinar or whatever the Iraqi one was, and then Muammar Gaddafi, the same thing. They both were trying to get oil and then gold backed currency. And
any country that rejects the central banking system gets invaded and overthrown, and gets to a new government set up that's part of that. It's very interesting how it all is working behind the scenes that we don't know about or see. Again, Afghan has tons of mineral resources. That was a big goal in mind for a lot of the contractors that were trying to set up shop in there, and are still in the process of setting up mining operations in Afghanistan. But the big one was the Afghan opium trade, as we mentioned at the very, very start of this presentation, and what happened to Afghan opium. The evidence of thermite, I think, is the most convincing, with AE 9/11 Truth being my pick for. I heard that they're already sending information to the Trump administration for this new task force, and I really hope that their investigators are placed in charge of some of this new pulling out new investigations in this evidence, because SAIC, NIST, should have done a more thorough analysis for thermite and really checked the forensic evidence. Should have followed up on the Dr. Jonathan Barnett's recommendations in the FEMA report, Appendix C, again linked to in the description for this report, where this is a piece of the only World Trade Center 7 steel that was saved and analyzed for metallurgy examination, and you can see it like it was attacked by something really high temperature and corrosive that melted holes through it and burned these angled, holes through this piece of a structural U column, it looks like, or a box column. Not sure. And these I-beams, which are steel from the World Trade Centers, also show evidence of slag and burn holes embedded in them, with slag embedded in them. I found these after my debate with Mick West, who told me that, I don't think that any of this could be true because we would have found more evidence of slag. And it's like, dude, they cleaned up the site and destroyed like everything, almost everything.
Literally shipped it all off. Was it to China or somewhere to get like melted and not analyzed at all?
Well, it's great. No, what they did is they had this other company set up at the Fresh Kills landfill that specialized in. They had all these patents for laser ignition of thermite, so they could just run it through a laser. They could run all this stuff on a conveyor belt through a special laser, and it would ignite any leftover thermite and burn it off, which is really interesting. And then John Gross out there on the steel site examining all the steel. There's pictures of him with the steel that looks like the piece from, the FEMA report, Appendix C. And he's on record denying that this what he's there in this picture. He's on record denying that this exists for NIST. So he should be arrested for obstruction of justice and held to charges and trial immediately. I believe that these people will talk to, or at least provide a better report if they're not given financial incentives to, basically lie about what really happened and not do. They didn't do an honest analysis in their report for thermite. They just said, it's thermal expansion, and we're going to write this collapse safety analysis based on that and ignore all the basic, real evidence. And of course, we know who is Richard Blee. There's this whole story of how the CIA officials covered up 9/11, and more on Richard Clark blaming Tenet for 9/11, especially basically facilitating the 9/11 attacks by taking Abel Danger out of commission, reassigning agents who were working on this stuff, and other tactics that they used to really prevent. Basically lie hop, my hop, like where everyone could say I let it happen on purpose, but they really made it happen on purpose and made it look like they just let it happen on purpose, or incompetence or something. And then we dig into the main guy at Securicom Stratosec, who's the CEO. We talked about COO Barry McDaniel and his connection with Leidos Corporation and SAIC that made all the body scanners for the airports after 9/11, made tons of money on that. But what's really interesting is Wirt Dexter Walker and his whole history, because the Walker family, again, George Herbert Walker Bush, and then the Walkers and Wirt's family in particular is connected to Russell and Company. His great-great-grandfather was Samuel Russell of Russell and Company that, started the Opium Wars and then moved the whole opium smuggling operation to Connecticut. And then they set up in Connecticut and have been running, basically out of Connecticut until these sons, get this job in the World Trade Center. And he has this weird history where he's got no pictures of him anywhere online. There's no wedding photos from his wedding. There's no pictures of him anywhere. And he's got the same name as his father and his grandfather, who are all Wirt Dexter Walker. And there's no pictures of him anywhere. And he was the CEO of the company that ran security at the World Trade Centers and on 9/11 and all these other
How
places.
is that even allowed that there's no pictures of this guy that runs security of
We've never been able. It took me years to get a picture of Barry McDaniel, and then I've never been able to track this guy down. But you look up his whole resume and his work history, and he worked for Glor Forgan, which was a CIA front company that closed down and went tail up. And so all the companies he worked for look like CIA front companies, which is just like bizarre beyond belief how this guy absolutely needs to get subpoenaed and investigated if there's ever a new investigation of 9/11. He's mentioned in Kevin Ryan's book, Another 19, which is, again, this should be the key. This book needs to be bought for everyone on Luna's task force, and I want to buy this book and send it to Luna for her task force guide to like who to investigate for 9/11. The Secret Service, as we mentioned, there's some really interesting things going on with the Secret Service and JFK, and with Albert Bolden, Abraham Bolden, and also the whole Secret Service stand down, which I didn't even talk about. But someone left George Bush in a well-publicized photo op in an elementary school classroom for hours during the attacks. They came in and warned, Mr. President, the plane's this many miles out, and they said they kept coming in and updating him. Oh, he didn't want to scare the children. That's why I didn't want to tell them what was going on.
He didn't want to take control as the commander-in-chief while America was under attack.
Right. Because Cheney's got it under control. He's like, stay out of this. I got it under control. We planned for this for years during the continuity of government disaster planning think tank. So I know exactly what I'm doing when it comes to this. I need you out of place and in a well-publicized photo op where the Secret Service, he should have acted immediately and moved out of there as soon as he knew they were under attack. A plane hit the World Trade.
Just like Rumsfeld shouldn't have been on the Pentagon lawn. Both of those are absolute.
Let me show you how to get out of that situation without alarming the children. Children, something's come up that the president has to take care of, and I have to go now. Please, I hope you'll all understand later. I have to go. Boom, that's it. The children aren't alarmed. They're not, You know how many children are alarmed? Got alarmed that day, didn't like have the luxury that, I watched it happen with all my college classroom, mates, but I'm sure there's a lot of people that watched it on live TV in the classroom. Here they are bringing out the TV monitor. Remember those where they used to have that stand with the TV that they put in the classroom? That was like going to be a good day in school if you saw the teacher bringing that in the room. You didn't have to do like hardly any work.
VHS movie coming up.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, Carl Truscott was head of the Secret Service. He should be arrested and questioned immediately on why he didn't grab Bush and physically remove him from that photo, and just get him the hell out of there immediately. The country was under attack. How do you know that he wasn't a target? There's planes flying in the World Trade Center and Pentagon. How do you know that there ain't a fourth one coming for Booker Elementary? How do you know that? You don't. So why do you keep him there for hours during the attacks? It doesn't make sense unless you knew he was okay. Unless this was all set up, man. It doesn't make sense. The big thing, then Obama, PNAC, CIA era Obama is in the White House in 2011. He makes this big press announcement that we just killed Osama bin Laden. Yeah, we got him. Rotten hell, you bastard scum. That's what you get for doing 9/11. This is the room with his Vice President Biden here. There's Brennan sitting right next to Clapper. Can't really see him so well with the everything obscured. But Hillary right here with, and then again, they claim they got bin Laden, but they never produced the body. They said, oh, we gave him a burial at sea because, we wanted to be respectful.
Right there. If there's truly disclosure of government under Trump needs to declassify the bin Laden photos of
all that
right?
Declassified shown. We want to see, because everyone, I'm pretty sure that Photoshop got him.
Right?
If you've seen that meme, I don't know if I had it in. I thought I had it in here, but we talk about this 20th hijacker. There was another hijacker that didn't show up, and he's been tortured, and beaten and kept, for years, decades. He's been in Guantanamo. There's all kinds of torture and enforced enhanced interrogation. We found out recently that one of the people involved in all this crazy CIA torture at Guantanamo Bay of the 9/11 suspects was James Clapper's good friend here, Luis Elizondo. Apparently, he scared some of these prisoners so badly with his ability to use He said it was electronically attacked him. Every time he fell asleep, he'd get electronically attacked with this weapon and woken up. And then Lou Elizondo told him that he was attacking him with remote viewing in his mind. But I don't believe that. I don't believe any of that shit. I don't believe anything out of Lou Elizondo's lying, counterintelligence, torturing mouth. So, again, 9/11 trial defendants, there's other ones that are still on trial for, planning and facilitating 9/11. And they're still on trial. They never go to trial. They're being tortured like until the point where they can't even testify. They're unfit to stand trial because they've been tortured for so long. But these are the guys that we're told did 9/11, but they've never actually been given a trial to determine if they can actually be found guilty of doing 9/11. Imagine that. We know Dick Cheney signing the waterboarding kit for Sacha Baron Cohen under this joke. That was pretty funny. There's Dick Cheney with his good buddy Bandar bin Sultan, the guy who funded 9/11 for the deep state. Here's a rare picture of some New York City firefighters with those weapons of mass destruction that we found under the World Trade Center on 9/11.
Wow, the missing gold.
The missing gold. And this right here, my friend, is a picture of a 3-wheel truck, the 3-axle truck. There's 2 axles on the back. See the 2 back wheels and the front wheel? You can blow this up on the other slide. You can't see it so well on the screen here, but this is taken down the street from the World Trade Center. You can see all the dust on the ground and all the papers after the World Trade Center's exploded. And this truck was photographed driving through all that, away from the World Trade Center site on 9/11. Go figure. That's a truck for hauling gold, man. You don't need 2 axles in the rear unless you're hauling really heavy shit, right? So there's definitely some more stuff going on with the World Trade Center than we've been told. Again, people talk about the 5 dancing and Raleighs with the urban moving systems and the gelatin art group that did, some weird stuff inside the World Trade Center up until 9/11. But none of them could have gotten explosives in the buildings without the help of those security companies that we went over and mentioned before, Kroll and Securicom Stratosec. So again, there's we got to be careful about disinformation and false rabbit holes. A lot of CIA people chiming in on the mix, dropping no plane theories and other theories that have been debunked and look like complete distractions, I'm pretty sure that these burn damage to these cars in the lower basement levels of 9/11 were caused by pyroclastic flow and not by a directed energy weapon or a laser, a space maser or laser or any sort of other advanced directed energy technology. How do you blast through the roof of this garage? This is obviously not what caused. If people have that laser theory or directed energy theory, that gets debunked pretty quickly with hard evidence, and there's more on that. There's people even that have gotten too close that look like they've gotten set up for crimes, like Philip. Some people think that Philip went crazy, killed his kids, and then killed himself, but other people think that this was all set up by people trying to silence, people talking about 9/11. So it's a dangerous thing to even talk about these conspiracies and to publish books on them or publish 2-hour presentations here, which we're at the summary of, and I have to wrap up because we just went over the 2-hour mark. But we're at the end here, and we're going to get into all the other stuff on episode 3, which I'll see you guys for tomorrow, hopefully. So thank you all, and we're going to wrap it up right here. Thank you all for watching. I hope you learned a lot about 9/11 tonight. Yeah, none of this stuff is theory. This is all facts. And if you need sources for anything, down in the description below, there's a whole link to this whole presentation. There's in the comments of every slide is tons of, you can do a deep dive on every single slide in this presentation and spend hours on. Trust me, I have spent the last 20 years on doing this and digging into this. So I love you all. thank you for watching. We are going to kick them in the butt and expose the deep state. And you guys are a huge part of that. Tomorrow will be the final part, which we'll get into Epstein files and connecting the 9/11 and JFK stuff to the UFO file, and really doing a deep dive into the UFO file and how it all connects to all these people and all these organizations, and really give you a thorough overview on what is going on with your government. Thank you all for watching. Luna's Task Force. Please send this to Luna's Task Force. Mail them this video, forward this video to them. They need to investigate this information for sure. Thank you all for watching. Have a great night.